Welcome to the Almost Rocket Science Podcast, an ongoing discussion on the world of STEM. Welcome to episode 2 of Almost Rocket Science. For those of you who listened to episode 1, a mega thanks goes out to you, and certainly welcome back. We really appreciated definitely all of you who visited our site, downloaded or subscribed through iTunes, and certainly left nice comments for us on our Twitter page. We really appreciate it, and we thank you very much for listening in. We have another great episode planned for you this week. This week we're actually going to focus in on rocket science. That's right, we're going to focus in on all the wonderful things going on with space and space exploration. As well as we have a great interview lined up with an awesome guest who you'll get to hear about just a little bit later. But first, to get us started, let's talk about what's really going on in the world of space exploration. We're going to start off in the realm of commercial spaceflight and space exploration. Now, many of us may think that not much is going on. But indeed, in the last few weeks, and months even, there's been great accomplishments, both large and small, by many of the competitors in this realm. Just last week, to culminate Space Week in New Mexico, the New Mexico Spaceport Authority dedicated the nearly 2-mile-long Governor Bill Richardson Spaceway. You might ask yourself, what's a spaceway? Well, really, a spaceway is just a runway where aircraft, or spacecraft actually, returning from suborbital flights will be landing. In fact, the main tenet of Spaceport America is Virgin Galactic, headed by Richard Branson. And if you know anything about what they've been doing lately, they've glide tested their Spaceship 2 actually, and they hope to be doing some suborbital test flights within the next year or two. So we're really excited to see this new front, this new wave of exploration start. And hopefully it will continue. We know there's many others working hard right now. In fact, we're trying to line up a guest from one of those companies in the next few weeks. So stay tuned. Let's switch gears and focus in on the government-sponsored space exploration. Some really interesting things have been occurring recently in there too. In fact, on October 23rd, the International Space Station celebrated its 10th anniversary. Well, what do we mean? It now surpassed Mir by being continuously inhabited for 10 years. That's right. It's now the longest continuously inhabited space station. And that's really exciting because when we think about all the things that we have learned from our time on the space station, it's just truly amazing. The list is too long to even talk about here today. So what can you do to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the International Space Station? Well, why don't you go outside and look at it? That's right, you can actually see the space station with the naked eye. And it's a wonderful thing to do. If you haven't done it, I encourage you to do it. Now, how are you going to find it, you might ask? Well, there's a wonderful site that NASA puts out that tells you exactly when it's going overhead. And we're going to put that link on our website as well as a tutorial video so that you can figure out how to actually use that information and go out and spot the International Space Station the next time it goes over your house. And if you're a student or a parent listening, why not gather your loved ones and your family and take them outside and have a little science night the next clear night that you have an opportunity to view it. You're going to really enjoy it, and trust me, it is a worthwhile experience. It's also a great way to get your family interested in STEM. That's right, science, technology, engineering, and math. Now, how about some other interesting facts about the International Space Station while we're on that topic? Did you know that the International Space Station is 357 feet when measured end to end? Well, just how big is that? Next time you're at your local high school, take a look at that football field and realize that that football field, including both end zones, 360 feet long. So the International Space Station is only 3 feet shy of its length. That's pretty amazing and a wonderful way to illustrate it. Or how about this one? The International Space Station has an internal pressurized volume equal to that of a Boeing 747. That's right, the jetliner that most of us fly when we go coast to coast here in the United States is the exact same size. Can you imagine living for 6 months in that kind of area? Quite amazing what those astronauts do. Have you ever tried to lift mom and dad's car? Probably not, because I haven't either. But can you imagine having the strength to lift 320 automobiles? Well, that's right, the International Space Station weighs nearly 1 million pounds. It truly shows us that the International Space Station is indeed the largest construction project ever attempted by mankind. And what an awesome feat that is. Alright, and our last fact regarding the International Space Station is, in a 24-hour period, the International Space Station travels a distance from the Earth to the Moon and back. Can you imagine that? It's about 240,000 miles to the Moon. Now that's just one way. So it's doing that and back. So that average on day nearly 500,000 miles traveled by those astronauts. Man, those guys are really moving. Well, that's all we have for International Space Station fun facts today. There's plenty more at the NASA website, so why don't you head over there or check and see how you can view it by visiting our website as well, getting that link. And we would be remiss if we didn't mention the International Space Station's next guests. That's right, the crew of STS-133, the next space shuttle mission, which is scheduled to take off sometime this week, has the ultimate destination of the International Space Station. Its crew of 6 will be flying on the orbiter Discovery, OV-103. Sadly, it is its last mission into space, and it's been the workhorse of the fleet ever since the Challenger disaster. It truly has been a beautiful bird and has done so much for NASA and space exploration in general. We at Almost Rocket Science would like to pay a little homage to OV-103, or the Space Shuttle Discovery, by going over some of its interesting facts and certainly highlights of its career. Discovery's storied history begins on August 27, 1979, with its construction. It took 4 years to complete, but once it rolled out of its assembly plant in Palmdale, California on October 1983, it was flown directly across country to Kennedy Space Center, where it was processed for its first launch on August 30, 1984. That mission was STS-41D. Discovery happens to be named after 2 earthbound exploring ships from the past. One of those vessels was that of Henry Hudson, which he used to explore in the early 1600s, and the other was that of British explorer James Cook, used in the 1770s. That is where Cook went through the South Pacific and discovered other things such as the Hawaiian Islands, and actually led to some of the first and early writings of surfing, which I'm a big fan of. Discovery's had so many interesting flights in its career, and in fact, it was the return-to-flight shuttle following both the Challenger and Columbia accidents, making it near and dear to many of our hearts. That's why it's so bittersweet to look on Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center and see Discovery there for the last time. At T-minus 6 seconds, when Discovery fires its main engines, and just a few seconds later when the SRBs finally light up and she lifts off the pad, it'll be her 39th flight into space, and it'll be its 13th venture to the International Space Station. Truly, truly a workhorse for the fleet. It'll have some interesting cargo on board as well, besides its crew. It actually, even though it's only listed as 6 crew members, there's a stowaway. That's right. One of the interesting things on the flight this time is called Robonaut 2, or R2. It's the first human-like robot that's going to be used in space, and it's going to become a permanent fixture on the station. STS-133's crew of 6, all veterans of one prior spaceflight or more, includes none other than Nicole Stott. She's a mission specialist on board, and she will actually be tweeting and sending mission updates via that Twitter account. You can follow her at astro_Nicole. With the help of its supporting team, R2 is sending updates on Twitter as well. You can follow R2 at AstroRobonaut via Twitter. And as with any other NASA mission, you want to head to www.nasa.gov, its official website, to find out all the latest and official information regarding Discovery's launch, STS-133's mission, any of the astronauts on board, and a cool interactive about R2. And all that space shuttle talk is a perfect lead into our guest, none other than Jen Scheer. For those of you who don't know Jen, let me take a brief minute to introduce her to you. Well, for the last 8 years, Jen actually worked on the space shuttle. That's right, she was a space shuttle technician at the Kennedy Space Center, and up until October 1st of this year, she did that as her job every day. That's right, she got to go to the beautiful Kennedy Space Center and got to work on parts or even get up close to the orbiter on a regular basis. Now, that's awe-inspiring enough. But she happens to be involved in so much more since then. She's working on this great project called Project Mercury Rising, which we'll talk a little bit about in her interview. And if that wasn't enough, Jen happens to be the founder of the Space Tweep Society. She's also heavily involved with Yuri's Night, and she happens to be a freelance photographer and artist, which we'll talk a little bit about during our interview. Wow, what a long resume that was. But let Jen do the talking for herself. So without further ado, here's Jen Scheer. Welcome to the show, Jen.
Thank you.
Okay. So we are excited. Obviously, you have so many wonderful products going on, but we would like to start out with the space shuttle because I think most students are interested in hearing about that because that's the glamorous side, of course. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you did when you worked on the space shuttle there at NASA?
Okay. I hardly think of it as glamorous, but over the years, I worked in a lot of different areas, actually. I started out working in the orbiter processing facilities, and I worked on what was known as GSE, which stands for Ground Support Equipment. There is absolutely a ton of equipment that is needed for processing the shuttles. It's used for testing different systems, all kinds of things like that. So I worked on things like monitoring the environmental control system of the orbiters, which is the purge air that circulates throughout it while it's on the ground. I worked on the DC power systems. That's the ground power that it receives when they're doing testing in the processing facilities. And I did things like performing leak checks with a mass spectrometer, that kind of thing. I also worked in the wheel and tire shop and built up the wheel assemblies and did decay checks on the pressure in the tires. You had to calculate exactly how much it lost every day, how much pressure. And then I transferred to the hypergolic maintenance facility where I worked for the last 6.5 years that I was there, where I worked on the shuttle's OMS pods. That's OMS OMS for orbital maneuvering system, and the forward reaction control system modules, or FRCS modules. I did things like wiring repairs, propellant line welding, and operational checkouts of different components.
That sounds like an awful lot. Certainly, you must have went in there an expert, right?
No, no one does.
I know, huh? It's it's actually really amazing how much work really goes behind the scenes. Excuse me, at to process a space flight or any even just a regular airplane for that instance. I know you have a little experience there too, don't you?
Yes, I started out as an aircraft mechanic.
Cool.
So I got the basic skills from that and then received a lot more specific training specific to shuttle processing after.
hmm Probably the biggest skill I think that you need to have at NASA is the acronym vocabulary. It seems like there's just an acronym for everything.
It's almost a different language. I think it probably takes about a year before you even know what anybody's talking about out there.
Well, we're glad you learned how to speak the geek, so to speak, and definitely have some interesting experiences, I'm sure. So we're glad to know that you did learn the skills while you were there, although you did have some basic skills, I'm sure. They had to be finely tuned, of course, and when you're talking about the stresses of a spacecraft as opposed to an aircraft. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the skills, maybe the science, technology, engineering, and math skills maybe you had in before or you learned while you were there.
A lot of the most basic mechanical and electrical skills I had because of working on aircraft. And those things really don't change. They're the same on aircraft or spacecraft. It's it was just the much more specialized system knowledge that you need to work on shuttle that you have to gain. And a lot of it is just to learn certain specifications that were needed for this particular spacecraft, and that could differ on another.
hmm Were there like a lot of differences between the different the orbiters, so to speak, whether it was Discovery or Atlantis or Endeavour?
No, there were minor differences, but they were built to basically the same specifications. But Endeavor would be the most different because it was built so much after the others, and they made some changes before it was built, but it was still very much essentially the same.
Cool. Do you have any, maybe, what are some of your best memories of NASA and specifically the shuttle program as it winds down now?
Well, the shuttle program is very special, but what makes it so is the people. So most of my best memories of the program aren't around specific milestones or specific hardware. It's all about the experiences that I shared with coworkers. I think that in this job, coworkers become more like extended family because you spend so much time together over so many years, and you're in this restricted area where everybody speaks this their own language and acronyms, and it's a really unique experience.
So maybe you could just take us through what a typical day was. Was it a normal, 9 to 5 job or something different?
Well, wasn't 9 to 5. Our shifts for first shift it ran from 7 to 3:30. But it would depend on where we were in a processing flow. So if we happen to be working on doing thrust or bench testing, then it would be that all day long. If we were doing a weld job, it would be that. It really was highly variable dependent on the schedule.
Hmm. And about how long does it take for, at least in your expertise area, to process a shuttle, so to speak?
Well, my area, we were not always involved in every processing flow because the OMS pods and the forward reaction control system are not necessarily removed from the orbiter for every flow. Generally, it's done every 5 flights, and but we would get what was called drop-ins, and that was if there was a problem with a thruster or something like that that they couldn't do in the orbiter processing facilities. They would remove it, and we would bring it down to our facility and work on it there. So I believe, from what I've heard, the average flow or processing flow in the orbiter processing facilities was somewhere around 100 days, though I know they've done it in a little less, and some have taken a lot more. But from our perspective, it totally depended on the particular flow and if we got hardware for it.
Hmm. Certainly, I know my students would probably be jealous of some of the places you've been and some of the sites you've seen there at the Kennedy Space Center. Are there any favorite locations you like better than others?
Well, I love the place that I worked for the longest, the hypergolic maintenance facility, because it was tucked away in the woods and there's a lot of great wildlife there, and it was kind of quieter and away from all of the craziness out there. But I also loved some of the launch pads that are on the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station side, like the Mercury launch complex and the Apollo 1 launch site out there. There's just amazing historic sites.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to actually get a tour for STS 131, and just even walking into the VAB, I think that place reeks of history. You could smell it oozing out of the building. So I imagine you have some fond memories of places like that too. So that's pretty cool.
I did. I worked in the VAB for a stretch of about 5 months when I was working in the wheel and tire shop, and it is a cool place. I mean, it's dark in there, and the place has its own weather systems at times. Like whole clouds will float in there, and it'll actually rain inside. But it's just neat, just the history of it, and the fact that you're in this building that is that massive is just incredible.
So it is pretty cool to think about, and just awe-inspiring to think that a building that huge, is there, and let alone you can have its own weather systems. It's just crazy. But So maybe we'll move a little bit beyond the shuttle because you have your hands in a lot of different projects, and I think that's really neat to show that the students too that you have a lot of different interests, and yet you're still able to balance them. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the projects.
Okay, well, basically, my short-term project that I'm working on is I'm doing a photography book of Kennedy Space Center sunrises. And this came about because I would take pictures of the sunrises every day on my way to work because we just really have some amazing ones out there. And I started posting them on Twitter and gained a following, and people started asking, if I didn't post a sunrise, they're like, well, where's the sunrise? So people started saying I should do a book of them. So I listed the project on a website called Kickstarter.com, and I was able to raise funds to get the book going, and now I'm doing it. So that's my short-term project.
That's pretty cool, actually. I remember you had a write-up in the paper I saw on your tweets too, so that was pretty nice that you got some recognition while you were still at the Space Center.
That was surprising to me that that went to the front page, but it did.
It must have been a boring day in Florida. I don't know. Actually, the sunrises, I hate to say that because the sunrises are so beautiful, and like you said, it's a piece of Florida that people don't get a chance to probably take full advantage of because of its location, even though I guess you can get around some of it in the National Seashore area, I believe,
Yeah,
right?
I think what makes the sunrises here so incredible is that often there are clouds offshore. So if you look towards the ocean in the morning, you get the clouds that make these amazing sunrises. Because just the sun rising in a totally empty sky, it can be pretty. But the really dramatic ones are ones that have clouds involved, and we usually have those.
And one of the things I know, I've followed your tweets too, and I've seen a lot of scientific knowledge of the clouds and different rays and things like that. Where did you learn all that stuff?
I learned some of that going all the way back to high school. And then I took a meteorology class in college when I went to college the first time right out of high school. I've always been interested in meteorology and weather and space and anything in the sky, basically.
People must wonder about all the space tweeps and everything, just always walking with their heads tilted to the sky and never looking at the ground almost. So, yeah. Well, and then I know we have another project you've been talking about as far as the project Mercury Rising, which is an interesting project, obviously, not something that's just going to pop up overnight. But why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, well, Project Mercury Rising was something I thought of this spring when I visited the Mercury launch complex for the first time and saw that it was in a state of disrepair. It's basically the weather conditions out there will cause anything like that to degrade over time, and without funding to keep it up, that's going to happen. But this is the launch complex where John Glenn launched and became the first American to orbit the Earth. Which was almost 50 years ago. It'll be 50 years in February of 2012, and it just seems like we ought to do something with this site to, I don't know, show it the respect that it deserves. To me, the best thing that we could do with this site would be to use it to educate and inspire future generations of explorers. And that's what I started thinking about when I came up with this idea for Project Mercury Rising. The idea for it would be to use the site to restore it to look basically how it did in the 60s, with some modern improvements, of course. And then it would be used to teach middle and high school students the basics of engineering and mechanics are needed for processing of spacecraft. So they would use the legacy hardware to learn the basics of engineering and mechanics, which really don't change and haven't really changed since Mercury days.
And I know reading on the site, you talked about actually having a replica of some of the Mercury rockets there.
Yes, I'd like to have a replica Mercury rocket for them to learn the stuff on. And then the idea is that they would master the basic skills on the legacy hardware, and then they would be able to go on and work on a real modern payload, something like a CubeSat or a telescope, or something like that. And I've lined up a commercial space partner who would then go and launch that for them. So this is a step way beyond a simulation. This is for real.
That's pretty cool, actually, when you think about it. I mean, I don't know. I know my science class, we certainly didn't think about sending anything into space, let alone actually learning about it and then processing it yourself and actually getting to go to the launch and see it go up. I can't imagine what a capstone kind of product that would be for students. I know I would sign up if I could go back in time there.
You would never forget it, would you?
No, you really wouldn't. That's the cool part about some of these projects that are going on. So do you have any, I mean, I know you said it's long term, you're looking to the future. Is there any idea of trying to kick off or do anything around that 50th anniversary?
Oh, I'd love to, but I'm really kind of just getting started in this, so I'm really unsure if there will be anything that will be ready by that time. I'm open to partnering with all different organizations and finding the right fit to make it happen, but we'll just have to see what happens.
And no doubt there's certainly already been some challenges, I imagine, considering it's on an Air Force base, and there's certainly challenges to come, but how have you been able to overcome some of those?
For me, I think the biggest thing is to understand where people are coming from. If somebody opposes something, understand their point of view, and then you can maybe change your approach to better fit their needs and goals.
Yeah, that's a good skill for anyone to have, actually. How about the students? I know you said you're gearing it towards middle school and high school students, but how many students do you hope to have there at a time, maybe?
That's hard to say. I mean, I'd love to have it to be a really big thing, but I imagine it's going to be something that starts out smaller. I mean, I would estimate that it would start out with groups of 30 or less, and then hopefully build to where there would be multiple groups that could be working at the same time.
Yeah, from a classroom teacher's perspective, you're definitely going to enjoy the smaller groups better too. I think that the students will, even though they'll be able to find people that have similar interests and work with them, and that'll be a good experience for them as well. But I think the smaller groups will help you out there too.
And having a high ratio of staff to students, I think is important.
Yeah, I imagine it won't be really launching a rocket right there, and you may not have all that kind of explosive craziness you might think of with rockets, but it's still going to be there's going to be some safety issues, I imagine, on the site. So
in any kind of processing, you're always going to have a lot of safety issues. And in fact, I went and got a degree. My bachelor's degree is in occupational safety and health, so that is certainly very near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to do my best to make sure that it is as safe as possible.
Well, that's good. Actually, you would really appreciate our first guest comments about loving OSHA. So I imagine he's just like, I love me some OSHA. So he was all about tying off and clipping everywhere, and he just.
Hey, it's important. It could save your life. There was a couple of guys that were working in the VAB on I think it was like the 41st floor a few years ago, and one fell, and they were tied off, of course, and he hit the other one and knocked him off of the ladder that he was
Hmm.
on, and they both, their fall protection saved their
Yeah.
lives. But I cannot imagine how scary that would have been.
An important question, obviously, is how did you get your start? Really, who influenced you growing up or going through school to kind of go down the career path you did?
I would say my grandmother. Um, my my grandmother's an amazing woman. She's 95 now, and she always says she was born in the wrong era and that she would have been a pilot. And so she supported my interest in aviation early on, and she gave me money to take flying lessons when I was 19. And I think that really had an impact and encouraged me to go into that field.
That's nice. It's good that family members can have that kind of impact on you.
Hmm.
So, what advice do you have for students aspiring to get into these kind of careers, these science, technology, engineering, math careers?
I would say that studying science and math are important, but don't forget about your communication and language skills. Those are key because you may be brilliant in engineering and math, but if you cannot communicate your ideas to other people, then you're lost. So it's really important to study both oral and written language skills and just become very well versed in them.
Did you did you like English growing up then?
I was actually more of an English and arts type of student early on, though I was very interested in zoology and marine biology. It wasn't until after high school that I got into more of the technical stuff.
Hmm. It's actually interesting because our first guest said the same thing, that it was his English class in middle school and it was his art history class in high school. I wonder, were you steered away from these careers because of the classes you had or the way they were taught, maybe?
I don't know. That's a good question. Um, I I was not actually. I did really well in math up until about middle school, and then they lost me. and and I don't think it was me. I think it was the way it was being taught. And I thought I was horrible at math for years and years until I went back, and when I was in airframe and power plant mechanics school years later to get a license to work on aircraft, and I had a teacher who taught the math a lot differently, that I realized, hey, you're not an idiot in math. You can do this. It was just the way that it had been taught didn't click with me.
You know, that's interesting. Actually, I'm thinking about, for some of the coursework I'm doing, to look into that the difference between female and male students, because actually they say around 8th grade that both in science and math, female students start to feel as if they're behind or that they're not actually getting it when they're actually at the same level, if not above the male students at that time. So
Hmm.
it's kind of interesting you bring that up. So
Yeah, it was. I was very much steered away from math just because of, I don't know if it was just personal confidence or performance in math, or I don't know, but I loved geometry. Geometry was my math. I felt when I took geometry, I felt like I was being taught things I had known my whole life. It was like, yeah, this is it.
exactly. So we have some crazy student questions, of course, as always, to add to the mix,
Okay.
that we didn't prep you for, but
Oh boy.
no, I know, nothing too hard, I don't think. One of the students asked, "Did you ever want to go into space?" Because I don't think you've been, obviously. So that was the other half of the question. Had you been, or did you want to go? So
That's a good question. I would say it would be great to go. if you could go like on a vacation and not have to go through what, I mean, just to prepare for an average mission. I mean, you're talking so much time and energy and all of that. I don't know if I could deal with that. And the astronauts sacrifice a lot. I mean, they spend so much time away from their families and away from their homes, and it's not all roses and sunshine.
I know we definitely have the wrong picture painted at times of them, but and what they have to go through to get there. But they're definitely, like I always try to tell my students, they're very brave people, and they realize they sacrifice a lot. So, in fact,
they are brave. That's another part of it. It's like it's still not a proven science. I mean, it's still an experimental thing, and it's not all guaranteed to be perfect.
What is it? A controlled explosion, and you're just hoping that
something like that.
And you're really hoping it doesn't find a way out that wasn't part of the plan. So
exactly.
One of the other questions asked, were you astonished by the size of the orbiter when you first got to get up close to it and work with it?
It's hard to remember. I'm trying to think back, but I think it was bigger than what I had remembered or what I had thought it would be. But gosh, that was like 8.5, 9 years ago now. So it's really hard to remember. Most people that see it are surprised at how large it is.
Mm. And yet it still pales in comparison to the Apollo rockets, although the crew area obviously much smaller, but still.
Right. Yeah. That's the one thing that I wish that I was around for. I wish I was alive to see a Saturn V launch, because a lot of my coworkers have told me about that, and it just sounds amazing.
And then probably the hardest question I think that came out of students was, how do you feel about the whole space program or the space shuttle program winding down and kind of retiring and stuff? We know it obviously impacted you personally, but how about in other aspects?
I would say that it's sad, but it's sad because it was a great program. So it's a testament to how great it was that it's sad. I mean, if we could just let it go and it's nothing, then it wasn't that great in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. And the way I look at it is that it's sad that it's ending now, but if it was 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it'd still be that way. And it's like we'd never be ready to just say, oh yeah, okay, this should be the end, and just have it over with, but yet we know that it's got to end at some time. So this is the time that was chosen, and people should grieve if they feel they need to grieve, but I hope that people will also celebrate that this is the ending of a wonderful program.
Definitely. Well put. And then the question that we're going to ask all of our guests, because it is the theme here, what does STEM mean to you?
Well, STEM is the basis of everything. I mean, in our society, everything is engineered, everything is calculated and planned. It's everything.
And that just kind of ties in, but it's, since you said it ties in with everything, why is the STEM education so important to you?
Because we have to make sure that we have intelligent people that want to go on and do these things. Because if we don't encourage young people to go on and do this, then we're going to regress instead of moving forward.
Well, can't argue with that. All right. So, well, we certainly want to thank you for coming onto the show this week, and we'll definitely really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule with all those wonderful projects you have going on. to even sit down and talk with us. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, that was a great interview with Jen Scheer, and we hope you enjoyed it too. We really wish her the best of success with her project Mercury Rising, and certainly her other products as well. It's innovation like that, and innovative projects that are really going to drive the future of STEM. And we at Almost Rocket Science understand that there are many more wonderful and innovative projects out there, like Project Mercury Rising, that are involved with STEM. We'd like to find them. If you happen to know of one, or maybe you know of someone in the STEM fields who would like to share their story, why not connect them to us? You can do that using the Contact Us page found at almostrocketscience.com, or you can even send us a message at almostrocketsci via Twitter. We'd appreciate any input you have for the show. You can leave your comments on our website. Certainly feel free to email us. Do whatever it takes to get the word out too. We really appreciate all the wonderful support we've received, and we look forward to getting out episode 3 somewhere in the near future. In the meantime, keep your eyes peeled to the sky, that's right, the night sky especially, and look for the International Space Station. Also, don't forget to check nasa.gov for the latest regarding STS-133 and the International Space Station. And for now, that's the Almost Rocket Science crew signing off. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for Almost Rocket Science, visit our site at www.almostrocketscience.com and use the Contact Us form there. Almost Rocket Science is produced and edited by Jeff Burgeon and Rhett Youngberg. Thanks again for listening.